Kanjin Kebe, Zogjen Zonga, Losanda, Shalan Sovande, Panden Sabe, Lama Rembo, Taso Chiwuro Benden Denjo, Kaji Chimbe Kone, Koson Toji, Mudu Zendo, Panden Sabe, Lama Rembo, Taso Ningara Benden Denjo, Kaji Chimbe Kone, Jeso, Chodan Tumu Mudu Banden Zabe Lama Rembo Jen Dazo Ningara Bende Denshu Kade Chimbe Gon Chanjo Ningbe Bado Demba Jo Masan Jeme Shera Baru Maje Manga Namge Ngobo So so rangri yiche de songe chanze lo de anta gade para samga bode ye so ha de anta gade para samga bode ye so ha de anta gade para samga bode so gere tongda jajo shewa da mede yebe jeda temba roje pezo sojo taje de ajo yo so shimbe yo aje me no Let me remind every one of ourselves to take a moment and cultivate the bodhicitta motivation, seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of bodhicitta, altruistic motivation, we should participate in this Bodhisattva's discourse on the perfection of wisdom gone beyond.
你考出了，他们这些嘛是考出了东西都不是了，他这东西就是日本结不写不是，对吗？写不是。
So where we stopped in the text is this contention by Prasangika Madhyamikins that one must realize emptiness or shunyata, Thongpani in Tibetan, not only to achieve nirvana or freedom from samsara, cyclic existence, but also to be enlightened or to be a Buddha. Okay? So that's the contention and argument put forward by Prasangika Madhyamikins. So now what follows is establishing the selflessness of a person or emptiness of a person extensively. So we are on page 152 of the English translation of the guide by Stephen Batchelors.
东西只为日本结不写吧，写完什么东西只为日本结不写完你，考啥的没？只为日本结不写吧，都谁单位日本结不写吧？考啥的没？只为日本结不写吧？写吧我，当不了什么。 当时人家就幸运过被日本出的大部分大的大过被日本，搞完了这么帮我是当我的所当所刚把军营的电子，的那看啥看那是前些的。 看上那一风不下雨的人呢，没把断的，说的这是说呢，那么那个信息呢，如把它查嘛一下，查嘛也，那没别个嘛一点，这那的那么是，让你随便说，是去世上呢。 那家那个生意没那个生意的，你下的，我们的知道了，那就当中的设备泄露是，如今大家大买，就么说南州现在大买，那生意买的知道了，那的当中的设备泄露是，那你其实的。 这么下的爸爸上面的，知道了，那就到时候就设备泄露，车灯弄呀大买，看那灯，就多不可说呀大买的，那么工作是，那么设备修出呀大买的，知道。 那是在我这设备泄露了，这刚把汤包给十句看的，除了弄些设备没人看的，不干设备哪个看的，那些注意设备，那些看的，这那看住人呢，那么一个，总是。 那根据设备，看住错把他们把担心，碰不得同心就不，同心别大概同心别大个大也吧，过吧我就跟他大过呗，告诉顿罗斯，我爹嘞，看见他的当中在里呢。 然后吃饭那考上，不个那这这一个在你个也没这这大样嘛是，他这考上他说的这些了，婆婆说什么看说什么的， 我大学就知道他看的字是和你大嘛，说我真的蛮过来的这多。
So we are on page 152 of the English translation of the guide by Stephen Batchelors. We are looking at stanza 58 in English. So the heading under which there are several stanzas that constitute analysis of the self of a person. When we talk about establishing selflessnesses through valid reasoning or logically, we first do that with the selflessness of a person, and then we do that with selflessness of phenomena. And so as Geshe explained, if self were to exist intrinsically and in of itself, then it should be findable, right, under analysis. We should be able to pinpoint that as we go through different parts of the body, elements of the body, aggregates and all of that, we should be able to find something that's, here is the intrinsic self. Now, because we couldn't find it, so that indicates that self does not exist intrinsically in and of itself. So that's what we are looking at, and stanza 58 starts with the analysis of such a self of a person.
我第二大天可是这头电不要我就是这个搞啥，到位是把现在他知道现在的时候，看啥的那一步步你那的看啥，上到咱们到眼到的，看啥咱们到咱的那一步步咱们到呀的学咱们到是，这当中现在我听这意思我的。
So there are different ways of presenting, selflessnesses. In terms of realizing selflessnesses, so in terms of the realization that we're talking about, first, so we deal with selflessness of a person. Relatively speaking, that's easier to recognize and realize. And then we deal with selflessness of phenomena, basically establishing that psychosomatic aggregates, skandhas, are also empty of intrinsic existence.
我这大这里知道是，当时滚大的连接的滚家你说的，我是出去刚开就有这个。 有的是没有什么，我只要的当时连接是，他的都给那个什么，其实是大呢，开始说的是，开始弄这些的时候，我大是，那住在开那个，住在大不大是我的，更大的大是我说，我自己写的印象那，我觉得他你说那的，当时连接个国家的，他不写的是我的时候他。
So when we deal with self of a person, we do that from two different approaches or perspectives, viewpoints. One is innately developed, sense of self of a person. We call Hlenje. That means it's just there. That doesn't have any reason. That's how we grasp at, intrinsic self. Then the other approach is we deal with, grasping at imputed self or I, which is called Kundak. So this is imputed by different philosophical thoughts, as we will see later on, in different, for example, schools of non-Buddhist. So they come up with different examples of self or Atma of a person. All right? Some would say that such a self has the nature of a matter form, okay? And others will say, no, it is a prakriti, it's just a nature there, right? So then we try to look at them and refute them. So we are refuting, self at two different levels. first we try to refute self at the innate level. That's what we are starting it off, isn't it? We all have this natural tendency grasping at self of a person, right? You don't need to study philosophy. You don't need to go through education. All sentient beings have that, grasping at self, which is innately developed. We call it lenje. It's just inborn. Okay? And so we are looking at the self that is grasped at by our grasping or tendency, isn't it? So that's technically called shenyu, referent point or the referent object, right? Does such a self exist as a reference point or not? So we are dealing with that first. So we start off, analyzing and looking at, our grasping at self, innately or naturally. Yeah? That's because that grasping is a very powerful grasping. And because of that grasping, that we have been in samsara, going around in samsara since beginningless time. It's that powerful. That's what has kept us in samsara. Whereas grasping at imputed self or a person is more philosophical nature. Like that has not kept us in samsara since beginningless time. It pops up if you subscribe to some school of thought, then it just kind of goes away if you just don't believe in that philosophy anymore, right? So because of the powerful nature of innately developed grasping at self, that's what we are going to look at. That is something that exists in all sentient beings, humans and non-human beings, isn't it? And nobody need to be taught about that. Nobody need to go through schooling or philosophy or anything like that. It just is an innate sense of grasping at. So that's what we're going to look at. And of course, so if such a self were to exist, hypothetically speaking, isn't it? Then it should be findable within our 5 psychosomatic aggregates of mind and body combination, isn't it? Right? So first we look at the aggregate of form, right? The Siganda, right? So if anything in the aggregate of the form, anything that's part of the form nature, right? The teeth and all of that, we look through, see if we can find such a self or not. Then we might look at other aggregates, right? To find out if we can locate such a self in any of those aggregates. So this kind of analysis deals with what we call establishing the selflessness of a person or refuting the intrinsic self of a person.
What is your daddy Garaka? Pumbanga Rekana diamond, the sort of similar non said what they go to Toyag, Chill, Subu, non, Jumat, Baba, Kaza, Shimolo, Shimose, Subu, Chevasio. So there's Pumbanga Rene, Dama, cow, Pumbanga Ganga Papis had done, yeah, man, that lost you, they lost you, and Pumbanga, that was my Sagra. And Pumbanga Reka died, Zen, you should go. Nia Meza, Pumbanga, da, my any pida in the Pumu Subun died, and Kasa Suing Shirati, and Shibada, and then so on the heat of Mary Miltonama is rejected Hida Mary charges, Tadi Demic charge is a shed the Rebecca out the other, and Karsa, Tatoni, Dad, Nia means a Simia in the da, and Dad was said, Mindu, you know what Dahi Pumanga, Chick the current yogurt, chicken, and so the chicken Kasa Suing, so Tadi in a Jimmy Tonsherry do that. Jimmy Toyakona Yena till that was taken. Shada, Teresa never said the country Kata Yamata, and the dog, the Pumbo, the chick Tadi Kayama, the order do have the theory, but the
So let me give you a sort of comprehensive picture of the analysis that we will be looking at more in details. Okay, and if self were to exist in or of itself intrinsically, then it would have to be findable under analysis. And where should they be findable? Generally, we think that it should be findable among the 5 aggregates, isn't it? Yeah, that's the real possibility there, not apart from them. That's what we usually think. So we start off with analyzing the aggregate of form, rupa, sagandha. And a part of that analysis is, as we say, that, for example, the things we will look at, our teeth, right, and our nails, and our hair, our bones, our blood, and then the pus and flame and snot, and all of these things which are visible to us, isn't it? If we cut open our body, what we see inside, all the organs, intestines, right? Everything visible is a part of the visible form aggregate, isn't it? So we will look at every one of them, right? Is this the intrinsic self? Is this the intrinsic self? If not this one, what about this, right? So we're going into every minutiae detailed analysis of the form aggregate, see whether we can find such a self or not. So we couldn't find it, right? And so as you have heard, that one of the reasonings we use is the reasoning of oneness and difference, or reasoning of singularity and multiplicity. I know how we are in English, right? We do so many versions. In Tibet is one. So we say that if intrinsic self were to exist, it would have to be either one with the form aggregate, let's begin with that, or it would have to be different from the form aggregate. That's the only 2 possibilities of existence. There's no third option. So we try to look within every element and part of the form aggregate, and we couldn't find it, right? And so that tells us that aggregate of form is not intrinsic self, none of its parts, actually. Now, if it were to exist as different from the form aggregate, then that has nothing to do with the form aggregate, right? Because they cannot have any kind of correlations or dependency. It's just like we are talking about a vase and a pillar. These are 2 different objects, right? Vase has nothing to do with the pillar, and pillar has nothing to do with the vase, right? But that's not the case. So under that kind of analysis, when we couldn't find intrinsic self either as the form aggregate or any of elements of the form aggregate as being one, if it were to be one, then a person cannot have other aggregates, isn't it? Because now the person, such a self, is the form. So it cannot be feelings, it cannot be perceptions, it cannot be consciousnesses, isn't it? But that's not we cannot say that, are you with me? Whereas it cannot exist as being different, which is intrinsically from the form, then they both have nothing to do with each other. So that's kind of analysis we try to see that whether such a self is findable or not. So we do the same thing with every one of the remaining skandha or aggregates. And so when we go through all the 5 aggregates and every element of the 5 aggregates, so when we couldn't find it, then what's the conclusion? there is no such intrinsic self. Otherwise, it should be findable, right? So this unfindability tells us that about the selflessness of a person, isn't it? Absence of such an intrinsic self of a person.
我的时候，他容易这边接他的这个是吧？是容易这边接他的，容易这边接人呢，他的对面接，他的他的那个，你呢？人们同学搞不能一下入我说，我现在接他的都接完球的上了，现在看我的碰碰，就是宿舍这上啊，他的现在看我这个说，我的当时考上他的。我第一刚刚人家看把这年，第一刚刚人家你呀，你看上没人家看上人呢，你看上忙不太阳这个，要么呢，看上就没办法，看不看就刚刚这个太阳这个现在，我提了那个忙不点干个现在提了，现在提里面干呀，他那书本的基本些，他那做我是也马送下的书本些，他可是碰碰啊的，哪怕是看不了的，看不啊的基本些马干个日子。
So here, I mean, the analysis we ought have to keep in mind, we are talking about if self were to exist intrinsically, hypothetically speaking, isn't it? Then it would have to exist either as one, or it as many, or either as one with, right, aggregates, or as being different from the aggregates. If something is intrinsically one with anything, then those two things become identical at all, right? They just become inseparably one, identical. If intrinsic self were to be different from whatever other element, then they become irrelevant to each other, right? They have nothing to do with each other, right? That's what we have to keep in our mind. And so this is how we start off, like all this detailed analysis, starting with different parts of the aggregate of form.
我的现在当面主要是我的这张提的人，现在当面主要是把这个现在是阿里夸夸不出去，他看见小学生的认识这些有的他夸的我是觉得我刚刚老这样子比嘛，他老人是大有的样认识到小学生这些老人大看看是吧？东西是啊，这个我干了的是，我这夸阿都是夸着呢。इनको मिसे करे या मरे को दी पहले ला वो जो जी या वो चाहे और सिक दवा शेर दी तो ही से दी थमो को खुआ से या चिरा खा पड़े को खुआ जो शादा ना इनको न्याम से ले देता निंग से दा शंसु से को ले ला या रेस
न्याम से ले दे से लेकिन तादी तो बच्चे
और तो बच्चे तो ही खुआ शादा ना इनको तो ही दे现在记录呀，这咱要么这过头过啥是老兵都要多是吧？小学生你现在这是不是他是被早上是贵啊？这上午没当的时候，那这个一当这写的，其他说的就是小学生扬州是要，这人扬州是吧？我这人。
So here we are dealing with selflessness or emptiness, shunyata, right, anathma, and so it is a difficult concept to understand in the beginning, isn't it? As compared to understanding compassion and bodhicitta. Both those concepts are relatively easy to understand, isn't it? Emptiness is just kind of gives a lot of sort of a difficulty for us to what this really is, this whole concept of emptiness is. But when it comes to practicing great compassion and bodhicitta and generating them, it's much more difficult. Easy to understand them conceptually, right, even intellectually, but generating them is very difficult. Yeah. Whereas emptiness and selflessness conceptually is very difficult to understand. What is this, in the beginning? But once you understand it, right, then it becomes easier, right? You meditate on it, whatever, it inspires your practice. Once you understand it, then that's it, right? So in terms of realizing emptiness, once you understand it, and then you've use that understanding, it's easier to realize emptiness as, compared to generating bodhicitta and great compassion. Yeah. Because, great compassion is compassion focused on all sentient beings, isn't it? So you have to think in many different ways to be able to feel that compassion from everybody. Then you're like, oh my gosh, all sentient beings, are you kidding, right? That's so exhausting, I mean, that takes so long. That's how people give up. Practitioners on the way are like, this seems so unrealistic. All sentient beings, right? And becoming Buddha for all sentient beings, people easily give up. Whereas emptiness is so difficult to understand in the beginning. Once you get what it is, the sense, then that's it, right? You just kind of familiarize your mind with that and cultivate. So that's what gurus tell us.
我这现在等到东西过的些的上，老上考给我需要嘛？现在这考没得我没得上的把其他人现在把需要嘛的是，看来什么东西，可就先生呀，考的啥有点点一了，这没得他，那上节他把他刚刚那些记住说，现在也是，老上看嘛的，现在考了比其他人嘛就现在，考的连都是考这把写过看什么的是。
So Geshe says that even though we may find it very difficult conceptually in the beginning to understand emptiness or selflessness, but never feel discouraged. Just keep working with it, through our mind's familiarity with this concept, right? Once you kind of work with it, it is possible to understand it, right? If that possibility is not there, then there is no possibility to achieve nirvana, enlightenment, forget all those things. All of them become impossible tasks, isn't it? So because it is possible to understand it, we are willing to work with it continuously, right? Familiarize our mind with these concepts.
我这些的，这了，就刚开始他碰不到同性，他搞我喜欢我这了，就在老就搞个啥子，我这他想的，就在嘛人嘛搞个我这个用过，但他的连接个。告诉的是，连接下的就这什么，这个什么的被打出古都什么，这个偏把是干嘛上，可是老下午的时候被容我这把是啷这容就叫我这这个连接是我的说这个呀头的，可是我是考呀就做的连接的什么，但是古代的嘛是。
So as Geshe said before, that first we deal with innate grasping at self, because this is what keeps us in samsara. We do not consider grasping at imputed self, philosophical self, as the root of samsara. But of course, we will be dealing with different schools' position about such imputed self later on. First, we are dealing with the innate grasping at a self here.
我这里，现在单单的干呀的呀，连接我当时的干呀做修也是，碰不了同性大一吧的，滚大过呀，地里边和讲到用过是，这里同性大过呀的我用过是吧？是单单的碰不的这，这那个状况是的，我的个的现做过呀，单单连接大的过呀，这里连接大的。 풍부한 수고를 곧 유대 상호단 유대 다 요구도 대 상호가요 말아 그걸로 사당을 지금 이거 라고 좀 라라 이제야 뭐 디자가 저디에서 어디가야 또 있어야 돼.
And so here we start off primarily trying to analyze and find out if such a self of a person, intrinsic self, is one with, is identical with form aggregate or any other aggregates or not. And again, Geshe emphasized this point, the innate grasping itself, it just exists in the mind streams of all sentient beings, right? We don't need to think about why such a self has to exist, right? It just comes naturally, right? Things appear to us as intrinsically existent. You don't have to think like, why? It should be, right? We don't have to think any reason. It's just a natural reaction, and this is how naturally. So usually, I think in relation to aggregate form, then we start to have that innate sense of self, isn't it? So that's why we are trying to analyze whether such a self is one with form aggregates or different parts of the form aggregate.
What is your the person the Omanjual loved? You moved on the Malunju, that's your letter, that did it. There's a by done go, she said, the Shun Delia, Shunju Leja, Jidetan, Sawakan Yedan, Jeda Dungishi, Yurchubak, the good dad in the relation. They said to go down, Jigisha, here's some butter. Sokja, Simu in the last June. Now that is the many go again. So since so last, my one Zamba some less go young the Minzi patient, did I go by Mrs. Hena? Joe me day. Jelly, Minoni, Nani. Nipan Pumbo ten, that way. Mazunda, my rondo in la. Naman the dead of the mother, my wrong thing you trouble by in la. Jigdati you know, that wrong thing you trouble you know. The Hipumbo Yajiram. So far, there's other Tonya Karniki. Senhiri Guna, Timmy Bishop, Teno, Kaya, Dad, Senhi in Basi, Senhi in Ba, then Tanya and Goba, Shella. Tina is a Pumbo Yaji Soso, Yaji Soso, Yaji, Pumbo Yaji Sodam, Semoso. Da kansa yin go ba ne shung de da ge shung de ge te bi so da ji da ne kam nga se da pu mo nga da gu de ne de pu mo nga ya ji so de se mo se de ka re se ne da de jo jo ka shung de su mo go yin go ba so de se mo se o de te bi bi so se o de de da 다들 그래서 코아코지데 데레스 지도 다와 치고 그러시다 될 때는 지다데 며 해지고 힘이 도고스 될때 에네 신지 신고지다 주제 레베 신고지 이베난 신지데 도고리다 티고야 디 조리스 어때서 나 제가 인지면이 가사라시 마로 또 거야 유제로서 가사라시 마도는 그 코알 드라이브 코알 마로는 등에 유시하여 말아 제가 등에 그거서 민도 그거서 어디야 당신이 티 샤니에 담에 또 그랬어 유제는 되게 어디래.
So as Krishna read from the commentary and explained that so we are looking at innate grasping at self, and great Indian master Acharya Chandrakirti in his supplement to the middle way or Madhyamik avatar, really talks about this as jikta, the view of transitory collections, right? As that which keeps us in samsara. And so elsewhere in this Bodhisattva guide also, this innate grasping at self, is the basis why all kinds of harms are experienced by us and why we harm other sentient beings. And so therefore, we ask this question, what good is this monster within me? It's not doing anything good. It brings all kinds of unwanted, harms, things like that. And so as Geshe said, the reason why we are trying to understand, this intrinsic grasping at self, because this is what keeps us in samsara. As long as we are in samsara, we are bound to experience suffering, even though we doesn't want it, isn't it? So our goal is to end the suffering, to get out of the samsara. So for that, we must realize the emptiness of a person or the selflessness of a person, isn't it? So that's the reason why we are trying to deal with this. Of course, we go step by step here. And so first we try to look at the self that is the referent object of our innate grasping, isn't it? Shenyu, isn't it? It is the self that is the referent object of our innate grasping, right? Because that's the powerful grasping we already said, gives us in samsara. But then later we will look at the self, imputed self that we grasp at, right? Imputed based upon philosophical tenets, then we try to refute it. So through refuting, right, the referent objects of innate grasping and what we call philosophical grasping, now we are able to understand the selflessness of a person, right, the emptiness of a person.
我这觉得这通过的我这他的时候的结果，他的这就是有所谓的康健。可他大的有些些的通过要么的我这要么的他的看看要么可能通过可能让人过，要么的通过没有去现在第一嘛是多少嘛是吧？现在这个呢，那通过的那些他来他们康萨噻，这个。这叫他的这边就那些都是这样用嘛是吧？这样用嘛是吧？而且现在这个呢，这些那看啥，他的对面这些，那他的呢，这边同学是呢，那看啥不把你的搞不能一些呢，搞的不把你这样用嘛是吧？我的那些看啥那些的看啥你这样没有些，看查着过是吧？我觉得第一呢，第二呢，这个呢。那些都是没得些，他的那这边同学搞不能一些，现在他听见的呢，那考上大的，通过这个他的考验民族，这没是他要么的大的民族时候这，就当着我都是过的。
So among many reasonings and way of analysis. The ones that Geshe talks about right now is in Tibetan called Shik Dorjee Tenzin, the reasoning of oneness and difference, or the reasoning of singularity and plurality. Yeah? And so how it works, as we said before, that if such a self were to exist, meaning intrinsic self, it would have to be either one with our form aggregate, isn't it? Or it would have to be different from the form aggregate. These are the only two possible ways of existence. There is no third option here. And if such a self were to be one with aggregate of form, that means either we have said the form aggregate itself is the self, okay? And in which case, then we really can't talk about the concept of basis of imputation and imputed self, isn't it? Because there's no such distinction, isn't it? The form itself is the self. Usually the aggregate of form is the basis of imputation and the self is imputed on it, right? That whole idea about the basis and what's imputed onto that doesn't make any sense because the form aggregate itself is the self, such a self, I should say, or there's some element of that form aggregate is such a self, right? That's why it's not working. You see that? The logically. Now, if it were to exist as being different from the form aggregate, then they have nothing to do with each other, as we said before. It's just like the pillar and the vase, right? They are two totally different objects, and they have nothing to do with each other, But that's not the case.
Well, this is it. So the concept doesn't link the person. The Pumbo Kora dies, the Pumbo Lord dies. Today, Kaka Zingo Marvas. Says that the Chiva is the cow design, and the cow, however, Gazilla, the Koran. God, I hear about Ranzi, the mother, the God, the Pumbo laws you were telling you about today, Kaka Zingo Marvas. And Tata the cow, the chicken, but that I did Bukaya, the Queen's Manzis, and take her as it could take that the Kaka Zingo Marvas, and the Joy Marsu, Carson. Cockapee Pumbo the Gata Zoom to the Taco Consumer, the Pumbo Yoko, Yama Tadeo, but continue with your child. So did you call that the Jay Bacana, Jayna, Tade Demic? And the Tadena, Demeto, Tade Governor, you see those loads and the court and the Yago, Ling of the and you said, son. 이모시 매자 티 가rum을 매자 저런 집은나히 요마리 저런 집은나히 요나이네 요던데 요고로 때문에 와서 어디 잡다 동안 되게 뭐도 니지 코랑 부부 책 다디 가지고 말이지.
No, so should should anyone say that, you know, this whole reasoning, right? They said, why you use this reasoning of oneness and difference, or singularity and multiplicity? You know, because the idea is that when we grasp at the innately, we are not grasping at such a self as being one with the aggregates or as being different with the aggregates. So why you are using that reasoning? You know, we just simply grasp at a self, right, as intrinsically existent, right? I mean, that's a possibility, right, questioning. And so answer to that is, well, if such a self were to exist, right, then it has to be findable. So we have to look where it should be findable, isn't it? What is the proper location where there's a possibility to find such a self? Well, we start with the aggregator form, okay? So if form is the site where we are going to look, see whether such a self exists or not, there are only two possibilities it could exist, right? Either it has to be identically one with aggregate, or it would have to be very different from the aggregate. So when we test the both possibilities that we couldn't find such a self, so what that tells us, the storyline is that such a self does not exist at all. Are you with me? Yeah.
我这真的，你这他的大把许个决定的什么都，都是联系可能个呀，那父母这他的这开发很成功嘛，把高头上了，这他的这可能也搞好是吧？是这高头上好些那个，人当的个呀，你看看这人是吧？我这看看这样嘛是，可不可能让人家的，人家的可能这么那有呢？ 풍부가 좋고 그러와 풍부가 전다 찍다니 니마 위제다 요시 찍다니 가르고 매들이 뭐로 제요 말와 제가 또 그런 제바도 요네 풍부딩 좋고 요자 근데 풍부다 찍다니 가야면도 스타요 말스 도스 파라브다도 뭐도 지 당시 그런 거야 나도 풍부 찍다니 되게 제가 가지요 말이스
So again Geshe said the same thing, but just make sure that we understand what he explained, which is when self appears to our grasping in it, right? Of course, it does not appear as intrinsically either one with the aggregates or different from aggregate. That's not how it appears, right? It is as if self is alone by itself that appears to us as intrinsically existent, you know. But now, if such a self were to exist, right, it has to be findable. So where do we find them? What are the possible sites where we can find them? So one of which is the form aggregate, isn't it? Because it seems to be related to the form aggregate. So now when we look through the form aggregate, every different parts of it, we couldn't find anything as the self. So that means, the being one with the aggregate, that possibility is refuted, right? Now, does it exist as being different from the form aggregate? Because we couldn't find anything in the form, right? Now, it has to exist somewhere else. We couldn't find it either. So which means that both possibilities of existence are refuted. So therefore, the conclusion is that such a self is unfindable. This unfindability means there is no intrinsic self, right? So that's the logic and the reasoning.
我听了他就是过了真心的现在他的说是什么子的嘛忙下去就书本去打这多他可是书本去我谁嘛碰碰个人来看的刚刚听能这个是吧现在碰碰个人的考察生意面上现在考察人生意是吧没我就都
So right now as we are looking at the Bodhisattva guide, it seems like the guide itself has only presented the aggregate of form as exemplar here for the analysis. It hasn't talked about other aggregates. But what we talk about, the form aggregate has to be the same with the remaining other aggregates as well. Because here we start the stanza 58 starting with different parts of the form aggregate, right? Is this hair the intrinsic self? Is this teeth the intrinsic self, right? Is this blood the intrinsic self? Is this, what is it, the pus and water elements in my body, right, are the intrinsic self? So none of them, right, stand as the intrinsic self, right? And then we continue with other parts of the form aggregate.
this is that the Karsa, Shenye Dago, Tapiji Tibetan Gita, that never do that we could not go one knees.
No.
You are that Shenye did to that our death, Lord Shadia, or the Shadia, the Shenye Chaka, to that Dasha, the Korar Chinza, Lord Shadia, yours.
Okay, in that case, let's going right. So I think he, basically he did not explain the remaining there, right? If we're looking at this, so the stanza 58 is, we look at already, right, the teeth and the hair and all of that. Then the 59 is we look at whether any fatty tissues in the body, is that the self, or is any particles of the body the self, or that is my lungs or my liver, are this the self or not? Or how about my big intestines and the small intestines? Are this the self? No. And what about the urine and the excrements? Are this the self, the poops that I'm sending out, right? No. Right, so we're going through, right, all these visible things which are related to the form aggregate and refuting every one of them as intrinsic self. So the same thing goes with the flesh, right? Is my flesh the self? No. What about my skin? That's not it. What about the heat in my body, temperature? That's not it. What about the wind, energy that makes me move and all of that? That's not it. What about all these different spaces exist in my nostrils and my mouth and my ears and everything? None of those spaces is the self. And now what about the 6 consciousnesses, 5 sensory consciousnesses and the mental one? None of them are the self. So then you said, such a self is unfindable, right? So that's where the stanzas conclude, because Geshe said, okay, now we will talk about the imputed self, grasping at, which is relatively easier because imputed self is easier to conceptualize, than the innately grasping self.
我这个连续进入的了，刚刚几块的，是不是刚刚几块没着解药嘛的？他的就在大把些的了，那刚刚几块没的了呀，那康上都这么着，都给电话些都电他抽就是康上，现在就在刚刚的那就是刚才我听小过了，现在这个的了呀。你刚刚几块买的，手就到没着，看些个7万一些，看些送一些就，我这个咱们这样么有，但连接那一几个月买的是。
No, so as Geshe said, that innate grasping exists, in all sentient beings. It is the same innate grasping. There is no qualitative difference there at all. Okay. Whereas when it comes to grasping at imputed self, or let me call like a philosophical self, then there are so many variations come up, right? We look within our Buddhist schools of thought, we might come up with different presentations of self. And then we look at the non-Buddhist schools of thought, right? Some of the prominent ones, which we will look at a little later, they will come up with their viewpoints and philosophical standpoint, right? And so there are so many variations when it comes to. So this grasping at, usually I call it intellectually grasping, right? Remember, I translated that. So this doesn't have to exist in every human being, right? Because people who subscribe to some philosophy, they have that, and those who don't buy into that philosophy, they don't have it, right? So we find all these variations.
다 지도 다 세다 강도 강제 가사서 아시게 나기 타기 용게 용데라야 용게 누구냐 용게 지워 용게 강제배 강사세 강가 드나시라 어디 강사 군데 가르세는 어디 정세에서는 희바리시 디마르디
No.
다 시타바드서는 영데 소우레서 그런 거
No. So.
어디래시네 아니 가제스는 소우 시바 다샤주서 강제 대중세라데 무슨 난 다디 저세야 되어 디시고라 이제 때때 미라모데 히도 디마다 코니데 초제 총버도 저 치료 가고 되다 되거리스
No. So we are on page 153 there, and stanza number 60 we are looking at, 61 in English, sorry, 60 in Tibetan. And yes, so as Krishna said that in this, the two non-Buddhist schools of thought, mentioned more like examples, are the Tangjenpa, Samkhayas, or enumerators in Tibetan, and the Chetapa, where in this English translation they call it Nayayikas, but I was doing my little homework too. I usually call it Vaisheshikas, not Vaipashika, okay, that's a Buddhist school, Vaisheshikas. And then I said, how come they translate Nayayikas? They said, oh, they are kind of related, right? So I don't know. So usually we call it Vaisheshikas. Why? Because they are reductionist, Chetapa in Tibetan, okay? So I will use the word Vaisheshikas, right, because I'm more comfortable with that. So these two schools, of course, there are so many non-Buddhist schools of thought, even within Hinduism, right? There are many schools. So we can't talk about every one of them, but many of them are more related to these two schools of thought, right? Different variations of this and that. They add some things here, they take some things out. Are you with me? Samkhayas or Tangjenpa, enumerators, they pinpoint to some kind of consciousness as self or Atma, person, isn't it? So it's the subjective experience, right? Whereas the Vaisheshikas, the reductionists, so they said self is a matter, it's a form, isn't it? So between form and matter, these all other schools are kind of either related to the form and and the mind part, right? So this is why these are the examples of non-Buddhist schools of thought.
What is it? There's a Karsa Dad Rodo Zuki, Yoang Moya, that Pir Karung should do Yeves. Then the Tangseba, da Hiva Devada, Shirabe, da Pebber Deva Yikana, Shenam Jikang, Shenam da Pir Karung Dujang, Riquatini, Capoves, go Nubala Gonde, did Tini do some goodness, go on Zedos, or did that day, Chiro. More Chuchu to the Shire, you took it there, nothing, Juzuma, the Tazadika, the Chitaba, Tangseba, the Chitaba, the Hia Karizana, Chitaba, Tangseba, the Hiva doors, and the Chitaba, the Pembo doors, the Chiro Masha, Da, the Yaman, Pembo, the Yaman, Hiva do, Pisi Kuni Karu, Peri Karuji do, Chishani, Kuni the Kas to the Yawahias. And she had the tea report by couple go to Rashi, tea shiny, and the goes Konika, the Konya, Shonga to Koya, you didn't tea.
So as Krishna read and explained again that when we say other non-Buddhist schools of thought, of course, my footnote, right, we only confine to different Hindu schools of thought. That's what we call non-Buddhist. So we are not dealing with any other Western thoughts, I suppose. This is my footnote, by the way, right? So don't think non-Buddhist means all of that. So in even Hindu schools, there are so many schools, right? Sometimes we talk about 10 or 12 major Hindu schools of thought. Sometimes we talk about the 5 prominent Hindu schools of thought called non-Buddhist, right? But whatever schools we talk about in the Hindu or the schools, most of them either regard some kind of awareness or consciousness as a self, or some kind of a matter or a form as the self. So if we know the reasons to be able to refute Samkhaya's, enumerators, and Vaisheshika's right viewpoint, then pretty much the same logic can be used, right, to refute other related Hindu schools of thought. So as Krishna explained that if we can show that there are issues or limitations of asserting some kind of awareness or state of mind or consciousness or perception as the self, right? That's primarily what the Samkhayas or enumerators are doing. Then any other related schools of thought, they assert some kind level of consciousness or whatever is a self, that is also refuted, right? Could be. Or that if we can refute through analysis and reasoning that any form of matter or a form is intrinsic self, as the Vaisheshikas assert, then we are able to use the same reason to refute all other related right, schools of thought. Or even some who say that, well, we are kind of, regard both, consciousness and matter as the self, right? Both, right? Well, that can also be refuted by using the same reasonings, right? So that's why in this we use the Samkhayas and Vaisheshikas as exemplars, okay, of dealing with grasping at imputed self.
And that the Chizu Jones of Hakon, that corn the Corsia go going to Chizu in Hakon. Say citizen, Chizu in Hakon is the Chizu the Taka Hakos on some caution, and the Chizu the Dao told me, Chizu the Dad Kakaris.
No, sir.
인타가타고 있어요.
알레로
어디서
서 디렉 다데 딱바 샤고
딱바셔. 다 시르기 시바셔고 다지. 딱 받으세.
다 시바노 딱바 예 시바 잉에 So okay, so let's tell a little bit about the standpoint of Samkhayas, Tangchenpa, or enumerators. Enumerator means they're like numbers; they like to count and stuff like that. So they assert that Ta Atma, is a consciousness or state of mind, right? Sheba in Tibetan. But that consciousness is also a permanent phenomenon. Yeah, a permanent consciousness there. And but that Atma is the one who enjoys all sensual objects, isn't it? But he himself doesn't need to do anything. Okay, he's just the enjoyer, right, of everything. And it's like he's the Rinpoche here, He has attendant. So his attendant is called, we called Chitto, is the primal substance, English translation, Prakriti, sort of a nature. So this one is like the attendant, like whatever the Atma wants, so brings it, provides it. Are you with me? Okay. So that's their relationship, right? I just want to enjoy everything, all the luxuries. Then my attendant, the primal substance provides me all of that. Does that make sense? But then they said that one day the Atma realized that why I am in samsara, not only that I experience pleasures, but some unwanted problem, is he's doing it. This primal substance is the culprit, He keeps me here, And so when you realize that, right, and the primal substance also not, oh my God, now he figured out who I am, and shy away. Now they get separated. With me? The Atma and the Prakriti, they're separated. So when that happens, you achieve nirvana, liberation. So that's their standpoint, isn't it? Samkhaya's path to the liberation is, until you realize that the primal substance is tricking you, providing all of those things, you just enjoy it, you suffer, you experience happiness, whatever, right? But the moment you realize that the reason why I'm in samsara is the primal substance is tricking me over here, right? So once you realize that, primal substance shy away, like, oh my God, now he saw my deception here, right? So they get separated. They divorce. They never married, by the way, And then you find liberation. You are liberated. That's their standpoint.
What they said they called Dominion go water, Judo, because Dominion do so China must do. Because I did Dominion do yonder some mere was China must do that country. Do the news because they do down so China must. And the Gula said, Chapsi vision, show me what they could die, the Gaga chap in his ship. Here, Shiba go into Shiba in the ship.
No, so.
Tell me everything is a Keva garden down and do last. That Chichu Gandhi is your country.
No, so. Again, the Ning of the dude and members and Sidu Tangyum some Shasha. Ning of the dude and member Chanyum said, Tido Tangyum some Chanyum Chasana.
Oh, did it tell you so the winning the that good Chanyum called Chasing, because Chanyum is go near the other.
Near the others.
Cool goes, did it tell you some Chasing Sunday Meva?
Ale,
Tick was in.
Let's on Chip Channel. Study to tell them about the other consistent. So, okay, now I have to refer to the text, how it's translated here, and then I'll come back with Geshe-la's explanation. Okay. Senior citizen have to change classes here. This you will find, okay, anyway, those you have this English student bachelor's on page 154, stanza 64 has that. Okay, we haven't got there yet. Okay, that's where they talk about the balanced state of purity. They call it sattva, activity raja, and darkness tama. Right? Are you with me? So those are we're dealing with right now. The explanation of that. So in the Tibetan translation, I think the word is nyingdop, literally means courage. Okay, and the dul is like a particle actually, and mynpa could be what we call gloominess or close-mindedness. Okay, that's the Tibetan straight translation here. So as Geshe explained, that in the Samkhya's enumerators, what they say is that so when you kind of realize the balanced state of these three things, why these three things, whatever term we use, these are the balanced state of pleasurable feeling, unpleasurable feeling, and neutral feeling, right? The terms refer to this thing. The three things are pleasurable, unpleasurable, and neutral feelings. When you realize the balanced state of that, because that is the ultimate reality, truth for them. Okay? When you realize that, right, then you could be really free. So as we said, according to them, Atma, Ta, is a state of mind or a consciousness, Sheba, and it is permanent. So it has 5 characteristics like that. Okay.
Yeah. What did you say? 다 제주간 데서 어디서 이제 있다. 제가 그 탈락해다 데 새로 도게 된 것이는 거기 장배마도 간거 탈락해야 된 거로 제가 탈락도 두다 지도다 나 체집이 가가리네. 지도 매사. 나 그거 지고 내서 늦다고 그랬어. 어디 타고 제기고.
So in the major non-Buddhist Hindu, as I said in footnote schools of thought, except Charvakas, Yangpenpa, right? They don't believe in liberation anything because they just only believe this life. That's it. End of the storyline, right? Other schools, they talk about moksha, liberation, nirvana. Okay, other schools. So they have their own presentation of how to get there. So as we said, some kayas, enumerators, they believe in moksha, liberation. Okay, and so they said. So when do you achieve liberation is that when the primal substance, Chiso, and the Atma, right, they are separated, right? And Atma is standing alone, right? This lonely Atma, that's when you achieve moksha or the liberation. Okay?
What did it cause?
No.
Did da de Tua mother would Gilo never said the Tua Tava mother would Jidu Yamdo said the co sounds of the Chisu. Cover Saya Tonga to you, Lega level question, like Chifian, they were so trouble. That the Chisu, they call God of course, they have called any court, the Chisu, the Corona, what you was pub, called Yamdo Mother, said the Queen Chisu was dying, covered.
No, sir. So the simplified version of Samkhya standpoint is that, as long as the primal substance, Chiso in Tibetan, and Atma, the Ta, they are kind of together, right? As I said, primal substance acts like an attendant, right? Or treasurer, whatever you want to call it. And whatever the Atma like to enjoy, then the primal substance provides it, isn't it? So as long as they are together in that kind of a relationship, so to speak, then you are in samsara, right? You go ups and downs in samsara. The moment you realize the deception of the primal substance, right, how it tricked you, then the primal substance also acknowledges the deception and shies away, got embarrassed. Now the primal substance, Chiso and the Atma are separated. So who is left now? Primal substance disappears, and the Atma stands alone. This is when you find the moksha, liberation. So depending upon the situation, some kayas enumerators assert that there are two selves or two atmas, isn't it? the one Atma is kind of in a relationship with the primal substance, Jizo. So they live together. So you are in a samsaric condition, isn't it? The moment you understand the deception of the primal substance, then that vanishes, and now you are alone by yourself, Atma. So that's the second Atma. So some Kayas talk about two Atmas of the selves in different situations, in the liberated state, moksha, and in the unliberated samsaric state.
Then you change going go la, tell a Kangwa Tango Chong do the change of ruins, get the dad Jasso, Tezonga, La Lunchava Poi, Da Hiri Jibu, Tabo Novo Yu to Hena, Timid, Jibuti, Da you make 2 times a day, say, Dazamanjoa, do good. Timid, Dangamashi, Gan Shima Maji, Park up the Dara, Yushija, Damina, Yuji Dawashi, Regne, Yukon, Eugene Joy, Shiba, Joa said, did you send the last? Use Rikuja, maybe said, take a geometric source. That was it, that here gives that was it.
No, so.
Then the court, and the here gives the dark arms of quiet, and the damn it, arms of Tawari, dark focus,
No.
Tawari, damn it, got dark by Jimmy, Negala, and the good dark took a cigarette. Damn it, they got good dark hair, Yamara.
No, so.
So the court. Data was you that was you got and that was the data with the 2 days Kamado. That mother comes and you out to take about us. So that the data that here you tap by but they take him to dinner and the meeting be dying, that was dark cocoa, so toned over. Or that direct chitol or the direct shall go those. So they take him to 2 cows.
So now we will look at refuting Samkaya's view of Atma there, right? So we're looking at stanza 61. So as they say that Ta or Atma is a state of mind or consciousness, but a permanent one, means unchanging, right? That's what it is. And so the Atma enjoys, right, all sensual objects, including sound, isn't it? And so now the refuting is this, how can you assert the Atma or the consciousness as permanent, isn't it? Because that's not feasible. That's what we're trying to refute it, the idea of a permanent consciousness or state of mind. So if Atma enjoys sound, and if Atma is permanent, then it would have to hear the sound all the time, isn't it? But there are situations where there is no sound, right? If there's no sound, then what is it hearing now, right? And so it's not right. It's not feasible to accept the self or the Atma as a permanent. That means if Atma is seeing a form, has to see the form all the time, right? You are permanent. There's no reason. But then there are situations where there are no forms, isn't it? So what are you seeing? No form, but you're seeing a form, right? No sound, but you're hearing a sound. So this is the loophole there, right? So therefore, your concept of Samkaya's concept of a permanent self or the Atma is not feasible.
What do you do? Eugene Kasa, the Dashi give the Taka, got data to 2 days ago, the Damia Kadula, and the Kotua, Tiaman call you, you mean the Eugene Shagamari, said that this on the Dashi gives a Tabari, you Kadiri, 딱된 들에 요 말이스.
no,
민의 유고 그 유도 마시면 내가서 그 유제 차고 말고
no.
유제 차고 말은 희와 차고 말이지. 희와 맞아 이제 둘이 거요 말이. 이거 딱 봤다 말이지. 민주 유에서 되게 무슨 어디서 있어.
So as part of this reputation, what is being, put forth is that there is a relation between subject and object, isn't it? Okay. And something is regarded as a perceiver because in relation to what is perceived, isn't it? And if there is no object, you can assert a perceiver, right, of something that doesn't exist. And that's the relationship between you, object, and Eugen, subjective perception, isn't it? So if you assert that Atma or the self is permanent consciousness, then if it hears the sound, it has to hear the sound all the time. Then what about situations where there is no sound? Okay? So that means it cannot be a perceiver of the sound because without the object sound, how can there be a perceiver of the sound? You know? Yeah.
어디서 제가 콜이야 다마지바 그 에네 다지 다히리 집 요마르데메나 에네 코 유제 마레스 유제 마이바나 코다도 데 차수이나 에네 힘도 봉화도라 유제 차수로 봤어 어디서 다
No.
힘세는 아주 힘을 소자 말봐
No.
봉화선도 뻗어들여서 봉자서로
No.
빵체셔
No. 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 So when we assert a subjective perceiver, it necessarily entails that it has an object, right, that it perceives. Without a perceived object, there cannot be a perceiver of something that doesn't exist, isn't it? If a perceiver could exist without its object, well, then why can't a tree could be a perceiver, right? Why couldn't a tree be a perceiver? It doesn't need an object to perceive, because why can't it be? Or why can't be what we call pieces of like grass with the mud, right? Why can't that be inanimate object be a perceiver? Because it doesn't need an object. Yeah.
어디 예와 게에 kell라고 제 되나 히자 자서 녀아네바 메바 자지 히바소 메치 예베 예와 예도 되네 유제 탐제다 유시 요거가 되나 다진이 타불라양 진다 유메장 미유 풍보도 될라 때네 다베 강사 좀 예베 소스 그래서 유제 인식이라 그걸 유지요 그랬어 그래서 강사 타불라 데테요리스 유요리스 유면도 다다 담에 내가 소 다 실기 딱 봐도 요말 거 유요말 유메서 거 유제요 말이지 어디 시거스러워 그래서 다 접대 체제지 체지 담에자 단지 시바 요바 켈라고 지스 근데 다 실기 딱 봐 가도 딱 봐 있어요 그래서 다지베 다 실기 딱 봐라 얘는 담에 내가서 다 다지베 다 실기 요거로
So in other words, how the Samkaras that viewpoint is refuted is that if you assert that Atma or the self is a permanent state of consciousness, and if it were to enjoy the sound, it would have to enjoy the sound all the time. But that's not possible. There are cases where there's no sound, and so without the object, how could there be the perceiver of the sound? If you still accept that without even object, it can be perceiver, right? Then why can't be a piece of wood be a perceiver? It doesn't require any object anymore, right? Yeah.
What you say in the you 당시도 야 지나고 유요머디 미국 다시 풍보다 나도 그 무유식으로 그래서 당시도 야 유요리스 지나고 유요머디 미유요리스
Even in the case of innate grasping at self, it is a perception, perceiver, isn't it? Of course, it has an object, it is focused on the aggregates. Its referent object is not there, right? The intrinsic self is not there, but it has a focal object, which is the aggregate. Yeah. So we will we will stop there today, and we welcome questions. Yeah.
All right. So it's a rather long question here, or explanation and question.
Is it a one big question or too many questions attached to one?
It's just one question attached to one.
Okay.
It says here, in my experience, grasping at self seems to be strongest when the body is experiencing sickness or pain.
Mm-hmm.
There is an ongoing fear of the physical body being harmed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the body experiences pain or illness, self-grasping is greatly increased. My body, I quote, my body is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
What does Geshe suggest to help reduce this type of grasping or fear during times when the body is experiencing injury or illness? Will meditating on today's teaching on emptiness of form and the aggregates eventually help reduce this type of anxiety when experiencing decline of the body, or are there other antidotes to help neutralize this type of fear?
Okay, so let me repeat back how much I understood right through the glass walls, and so whether that's enough, right question. So what the person is saying that he or she realizes that the grasping in itself is stronger when the body is going through pain, isn't it?
Correct.
Because the more you're feeling pain, more grasping, right? So the question is, what does Geshe suggest to be able to deal with that kind of grasping? That's basically what the question is, right?
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Can Tajie thon kandi shue chila rwa gen. Chigi nyongzo shig do gen. Kansana kangsa chwa tangi de nyongzo li ya kurang nguen de te wina ta lenje gi tangjin de rwa gen. Ka de shuk chamba sha yong de sana so subu te wo me de rwa gen. Na sa yong de kan la de ne lenje gi tangjin de shuk chamba sha yong do rwa gen. Na za ka za mang ta ban ko tangjin ko shuk chir rwa gen. Nguen ji chebin rwa cha da de ne gi ka lu go za tangjin de li ya ta ka so gore nyem bo so rwa gen. Samro tang da ka ri na sa king thap shir rwa gen. 다 당진들이야다 가서 올다 님보다 서 오르와게 다고 수부 대원매 나자 당이 되고 나자 가서 체되 되네 당진 쇼쇼 누구도 서와게 다 될이야 탑시에 가서 섬을당다
진짜 다 당진 쇼쇼 누구는 다다 가서 이저 다기 저는 시야로 다다 그래서 풍부 직타디 가서 지마시야로
네 나자 당되게 풍부
다다 가가 쇼쇼 보용이나 다 그런 상황나 위야디 가서 풍부점지 속들에도 소화를 드셔도 가르면 숙성을 가는 용도 믹서도 가르면도 어디 있다고 그러. 다도 속에 수분들에서 다 수분도 다 레베슬나 수분다 말이지 이는 찍다들 찍는데 수분다이다 찍이는 다들 때문에 찍시는 수분도 강사 차시 많이 비타 그러 봐.
그래.
다들 있는 레메 동의서 우리 까부나시
No.
And subu the kora dahi remarva.
No.
What is it?
No. So Geshe suggests that what he explained earlier, right, that analysis could be used in that kind of situation where you feel that when your body is in the state of pain, the more pain you start to have stronger grasping at the body, right, at the self. So that moment. So try to see how the self is appearing to you, because according to your experience, there is a strong appearance of intrinsic self, isn't it? So now you analyze, does that self, is that one with this painful body, right? The body, right? Not. So it cannot be. The body cannot be identical with that self, which means that then you have to nullify all the feelings and the consciousness, everything, because the self is one with the body, isn't it? On the other hand, you can say, is that self now the part of the aggregate of feelings, or aggregate of compositional factors, or aggregate of consciousness? So when you go through that, and you don't find any of them as the exemplar or the identical with that self, right, then I think that helps you, right, to reflect on the selflessness of a person. Oh, I thought you want a question. Let's start with Latmir. I think Latmir has a lot of questions, so then others can think. We are using time economically here, right? Yeah.
This is probably kind of not entirely related, but anyway, it says here that lymph, in the commentary, lymph and pus are not the illustrative basis for the self.
Say it again.
Lymph and pus, I'm quoting from this translation. And pus are not the illustrative basis for the self, or the base of illustration, or illustration of the self. Right?
Okay.
Different terms. What would be a proper basis of illustration or proper illustration of a self? Would it be tashi? Tashi, would that be a proper illustration of the self?
Oh, I see. What can represent the self? Illustrative.
Illustration.
Right?
It's a technical term,
Okay,
right? Illustration.
Yeah, I don't know how they translate which one. I don't have the text.
Yeah. So what would be the proper illustrative basis of?
Okay.
I'm sure.
Sure, right. Let me see if I try. Maybe we might get the answer, right? Quran condition the said that king is see the deba duage. They give English in the George Polo de Sarwa. Then a tiny thing with what I had to pivot the mess again if you shoot to me. Take deal ago Ravaganta, Fungo de Nala Tats at the Nigi Marwage, Ta the Pegam, Mare, Ta the Carso, Marek, Mare Lavage. Says that and it thought the Chundun is summertime in Narawage. Ta Chundun Wama the Carriage House, and the meeting trashes love in Narawage. Trashes love in a Tata, the Chuya, the trashy Chungu was a trashy Nangi Pegam, the saw that they get in radio Marwa. Ta Chundun can sing it with. 다 춘대 중으로 다 춘tuk면 식으로 와. 이 민트라시 세gen디라 차도고래 가르쳐 거래서 다 춘대 중국으로 와게.
다 총선에 다 기세고래 가르쳐 그래. 다 지금 다세대 가르쳐 그래. 다시 가르쳐 그래.
So are you talking about the basis of the self, or you're just talking about what the self is represented by?
The basis of illustration. To give you an example, what maybe this will tell you what the, for example, product is a functioning thing.
What?
A product
is
a functioning thing.
Yes.
The illustration of that would be a pot.
Well, yes.
Okay. A
pot example.
Okay. This is what I mean by illustration.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
That helps. Yes, that helps. Right. Ale Quran din sare ta ge chenshi re shana sigu sarwage. Pena ngzo rabe chendarawage. Ta karsa gore cheba ina midabe me chebgir sarwage. Ta chebe chenshi sholana ani pumba cheslarwage. Din ashin ta ge chenshi shabana karsha gore sabena Pegan didn't matter, so they married Tani Maragamala Roge. That means Trashi Laganti go tag
He has a big relationships in Diora. Could Trashi shall do to do can do Chayamara. He gets Shadra. Move take yours and the promotion that degree. Gosh, that degree, social degree.
Done the Sugu Chashi, the tag sensi digging as a Ming Trashi Lagan, the tag sensi Kochugo.
Oh, do because I think your tradition do.
Yeah, Geshe thinks yes. The illustrative example, let's say, of a person is whatever the name is, right? Trashi, John, Sally, Melly, right? Just like say, if we say anything that is produced, is impermanent. For example, we can say vase. Now we can say pot. We can say flower, right? It doesn't matter, right? Yes. No. You said Latmir is an illustrative example of yeah. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. Sure.
So this is the illustrative basis.
Yes.
But I see this is an isolate, right? It's an isolate. Isolate, yes. Illustration, isolate.
Okay.
But then here, in the commentary later on, he says the he talks about a self-isolate. So there is an illustration. We figured out what it is. Tashi is an illustration isolate of the self.
So you're looking at the same
commentary, yes.
Dealt with?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
Geshe didn't comment on that particular.
Right.
And then there is self-isolate. So the sentence states, the innate I, as perceived, is simply, in italics, as perceived, is simply the self-isolate of the self, or imputed on the base of the aggregates.
Okay.
So as perceived. So there is a distinction between as perceived and as experienced.
Difference between as perceived as
yeah,
experienced.
perceived and experienced. Again, the terms that are being used here are not the ones that we're familiar with, so
sure,
it's
right.
it's a problem. But experience is basically refers to the innate, the assumption that such as say I exist naturally.
That's right. That's the
That's
innately,
the experience,
right,
but
right.
they're talking about the perceived. So they're saying the innate I as perceived is simply the self-isolate of the self, or I imputed on the basis of aggregates.
Okay. I think I got a sense of what you're saying. Okay, let me try that. Maybe this come. Because the Quran Tibetan that king is Shaban al Yasang Alamed, the Tata Labsuk Medoga, Prejan and Sigurwa, King Loy, Devati, Consul Juries, and that 600 years at the Wage. That did in this language and Kodan and the again. Chitu can look could this shake those again. Tag Selva singers to the Kentucky. Tag Selva. Selva Sudden was Selva say your mother again. Yeah, Kausal Selva, that's already. My Takoran comes out of slow with that. Selva. Kagaris, Kaga. Oh, did it mean on? Well, Tag Selva Meadow. Took Tungus again, dinner again. Can't have it in the customer sector. Tag 7 Tungus at a while. Just a dinner or what this she could do something. Castle Henjay, Tangzir of Chimben Rawage. No way on a Shadan, dan quote Casauda, the Eugene talked out on Shadani or rest of again. No way on a Chava in the Tag 7 seconds, the Rawag gets that you go in the Rawage. The deal Chad rest. That talk down one Chava in a direct thought, the Karisha or Sedukala, and a Pumbola ya Tash of a Tash at your again. Yes, again, the Chabi the chick sick to again. Chabi. The Tibetan again, the years of copy again, you the log of the what, they check jury yourself again. Yet that sick the Tagda the shoot with Tag 7 and the cousin of the Yomar again.
Das did a dog dashi of the music I may do. Das the Kachikata was the Kongsa say, but do to such a Dimaka result, das was a Kashi.
In
I tell you to das as the young wrong change of das, Darang was a Yomar.
No.
Lende the Dadi is but the Lende the Dadi, that's so Shantiganga. Because I used to call Lende the Dadi.
I'll again send dinner yourself, getting lost in the decision. In mental or the hello. All right. I'll put the shadow do it. Okay. Yeah. Maybe that what Geshe said might help, right? Because I tell Geshe, can you open the book, right? Because I can't translate exactly what the Tibetan words there, but he's not opening the book. But I think Geshe probably got it right. So I think the difference they were talking about is that the self that's refuted, right? That's where we use the word, I think, self-isolate, right? In the sense of something intrinsic self, right, that we grasp at, is, I think the term is there, the isolate self, whereas the other self, we call imputed self, right? That's the one that's imputed onto the aggregates at the basis, right? I hope that's what it is, yeah.
Gaja das, the tiny liver das, he gets it.
No. That what they call Tanya Rang to get to the again, they chat what Tanya did again. Because Geshe are thinking, because we are talking about two selves, the self that is the object of refutation and the self that is conventionally existent, right? So that's the difference between the two, right?
Yes, but the point is that this is precisely what the self-isolate that they talk about is precisely the I that's imputed on the base of aggregates. That is the I that exists. They call it self-isolate. Okay, again, the innate I as perceived is simply the self-isolate of the self or I imputed on the base of the aggregates. This is the I that exists. Self-isolate is the I that exists. Merely imputed on the basis. It's not the one, the conceived object of it. So that's why I'm
opening his textbooks. I don't know, right? I said you have to look at that because right, I don't know what the term is.
Could it be that self-isolate is actually the proper understanding of the I that exists, not the I that doesn't exist, but the I that. This is what it means here. Right. See, there are 4 types of isolates to give. There is a illustration isolate, meaning isolate, self-isolate, and some other isolate. So maybe this is what I'm just telling them so that they know what isolate. This is the meaning of isolate.
Right.
We already heard about illustration isolate. Now there's self-isolate and meaning isolate.
What would be the Tibetan word that I would translate, right?
Right.
So I have not
Okay.
getting it. Yeah, sorry.
It's
Maybe next
complicated.
time when you open it, if the word comes, we'll grab it, right? Okay, we'll grab it, yeah. Because they could take the other years, they take the because of Madura Liam or quitting a liam or other. Take the Pivena Karina. The patient I said, King, the Lord, the good decision, so the Koran that so not shadow again. That's a Sanima Shuma gang, it's habit logic or turns and I take the other Lavache, Rogan, or delay, La Rogan. Yeah. Right. You mean the conventional self. Yeah. But Koran Kotan and the Page Tanya, the Betal, like him at all, or what I think a conscious 6 Tanya, the big patient of your Hagundula, but again, Sanima Shuma, Petal, the turns and on the Shiji Shell, Rogan. Yeah. Geshe agrees next time. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, we have still some time. Yeah.
Could you just go over again, please, the separation between the Atma and I think it was the...
Oh, the primal
awareness?
substance,
Yeah,
you mean?
please.
Yeah. Could you explain that again?
Yes, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, the Geshe said that according to some Kayas, enumerators, right, they accept two selves, Atma. The Atma that is conditioned, right, by the primal substance we call Chiso. And that's how you are stuck in samsara, right? The primal substance provides you all the enjoyments and music and the food and everything. Geshe didn't say that, but right? And then you get, okay, my life is good. But at a certain point of time, you realize that, my God, you're deceiving me, right? So when you see the deceptive nature of the primal substance, then the primal substance disappears, feels embarrassed, and now the only Atma stands alone. That's unconditioned Atma, right? And so that's where you achieve moksha or the liberation, according to their, yeah. Yeah, sure.
Regarding this, what are the Sankhya's?
Yeah.
Some Kayas, by eternal they meant, by permanent they meant eternal. Why don't we say that this is what they say it's permanent. We say permanent. They say that it's permanent, but what if they mean eternal?
Okay, sure.
Not momentary. Would there be any faults then?
Sure.
With there? And after all, Madhyamikas would agree that the consciousness is eternal.
Sure. Yeah, that's very clear to me. Thank you. Quran this is what that again Translator begi ta shirigi kibudi number 7 talk about the again. Number 7 talk about rest again. The takpa say the jur ki chikaba mando again. Takpa malab che again. The June get takpa is lavina again. June get takpa mare, June get takpa rest lavina and Tanda June day the Kanga Jugo or Jugo Maresa, June get takpa in Leg Marvesa.
Jung takwas jung misebal jung takwas yami. Chita takwas misebal shagro.
Then June get takpa your again, takpa marva the June.
Ala jung takwas na ta jung masebal jung takwas takwa ta jugu isheka.
Or the lavina and June Carresa, Tanda June to get the Jugo Marvasa, that point depend. Takpa lai the Casa Juro maybe takwa the Miami chair again. June get takpa better to 10 days to get here. And
the jung takwa thing also nangba sanji with the Changsham with the jung takwa marda. Kurum go takwa do.
Yeah, I think some Kayas are like, but we do accept eternal rights. They are not talking about eternal, but they're really talking about that self as in the nature of unchanging permanent, right? Yeah, so that's the right, yeah. Otherwise, Buddhists also accept, right, not the permanent, but eternal, something that exists, yeah.
So all of this deals with the refutation of a gross self of persons, right?
Okay.
Maybe that's a permanent partless refutation of existence of a permanent partless and independent self.
Good.
So in this part we're dealing with something else already.
Okay, sure.
So the object of refutation is different from what we dealt with earlier, right?
Okay, let me double check, yes. Al-Quran this tanda degen ta kaya shor was again. Tangzime ta kaya di and ta rapat kaga yorwesa ta taxi rawanchi ta sa chorwa again. Di kaga yore and di member task kaga resara again. Joje di jurmen rosa. Taxi rawanchi ta rapat kaga yorwe Dakaso Rangshin Rupa Taka or Karta Wars or again.
Tanda de rangye tiba da
But Rangshin Rupa Ta.
tanda de changshe ka du ka de rangye tiba de ke samare. Kurang ta USA da kor takba insa joro.
Taka Taxi Rawanchin Tadarwa.
Taxi rangye or da re da rangye du yo de.
But the end Tar Rabba was at the mother.
Rakwa
Tanda Ding Ale or Zimbabwe or
de. Kuta su de rakwa de.
That's right. Here we are dealing with the gross form of self, right? This is imputed one in the nature of Takpa, permanent, Chikpu, partless, and independent. That's right. So we are dealing with grasping at imputed self, philosophical, right? Not the subtle one.
Yeah, and this self is not the root of cyclic existence. That's the troublemaker.
Taxi Rawanchin, Tangzin, Kobesawa Marwaski.
Ale taxi rangye da ke lang said that taxi rangye da go
But Taxi Rawanchin, Gita, Zimbachi or the Kobesawa
Ale taxi rangye da chwas the koesa go more.
That's right. It's not the root of samsara. That's right. Yes. Okay, that will be the last question today. Yeah.
Okay, this is a very basic question, and I don't have any understanding of it, but is the isolate that Vladimir is talking about, is that the isolate that comes up under something like established basis in...
Sorry, I can't answer that because the Tibetan word is in that text. I asked Geshe to open his book, he's not. So maybe next Sunday, if you can grab the word, then you can ask that question, right? Then I may be able to translate. Because right now I translate it, he's not understanding it.
Okay.
Right, the Tibetan word.
Because the isolate isn't it a big topic in
I don't know.
monastic?
I can't even translate to him, right? So I
That's
can't
a question.
translate that word.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
That's my problem, right? I don't know what the Tibetan term is because then Geshe is not understanding it, right? I don't know which one they translate as isolate, the Tibetan term, because I don't have the text, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Right.
Okay,
So we confirm with the same problem that, like Vladimir, I said we have to wait for the next Sunday because we don't know. Right. At the moment, it seems like that's the conventional self, but I don't know what that term is actually in Tibetan.
The term isolate.
Yeah, but I said it. No, that's not making sense to him. Right. Yeah.
That's
Somehow, maybe I think give me some time. I will hopefully during lunch or something if I can make sense something with right because otherwise I'll create more confusion.
My question didn't have anything to do with as it relates to Tashi or any kind of self. It was just isolate as it comes up in monastic education.
I don't know. I said, how can I translate that isolate to Geshe? That's
Established basis.
Huh? Yeah, I don't know. Without the term, right? Yeah. Because somebody can isolate like the Kogudo again. The Tanya Kogudo. No, he said he doesn't understand what isolate. Yeah, so we have to see. I don't know because those different translators, right? Maybe that's the right one. I don't know. Right at the moment, I'm neutral. So, right. Okay, so we will stop there today. So I have been asked to announce that, re-announce, next Saturday, right? Is that the 26th? Those who have done solitary Yamantaga standard retreat completed, we will be doing the self-empowerment or initiation here from 2. It might go from 2 to 6, but don't hold me onto that, right? I'm not the chant leader. It'll start at 2. And so you're welcome, right, to participate in that. But if you have received, that's my footnote again, because some of you might appreciate, some of you think I'm too nosy here. You might have received the Yamantaga initiation, but you didn't do the retreat. That means you cannot do this self-initiation, okay? So you should have received the Yamantaga initiation, plus you should have done the retreat with the fire puja. Then you can participate in this self-empowerment. Okay? Just a clarification from translator, not from GSTDL, but yeah. Those conditions. 罗的家族与众别个人，加上不别驱动明白心，电把进了王道基础，常年出关去了。所望的马王当面关键东岸的刚烈中所念的是着，张根叫我你我要设计，张松人子马尾西巴。天津这边经过这边真世界内关常驻等，龙座他们这北边北云这绿色家族工作小等，天上工厂汽车装备这用作有人土北亚给龙日天津那边北等吧，土镇抗日大部小等。东南空门这把南大关等当周围盆地中围，人多居民区别城里，街上对接等多小店说，其实拉面土街没有浪的，街上对接等当上面，说从多多去多多，其他门边顿个人多说。让将新给公布财报面做到南界借用这么说说这一他说他们这些大的米线交给我中，昨天写到路上讲，写着南方这边被影响，他的对这中国杨对年节公布说话的，今天中国强大北面，代表着我说说他话。南大、水镇、杨大、浪巴也罗上简单百度设备，最终家政、农村、养百姓、上学、南区、长征准备，公众写了送中这边，代表俺大全部设备说，前边东岸国外补助，准备顿顿那些张照说，开出新年全部小店说，开表朗读故事这的，准备查查年做让啥些上边对接这个一些，说不定新年全部小店说。民众上去上面这点吧，老孙今天。现在新年全部小店说，说从叫我世界前了等，昨天他们见书面错了，到上拉上大边这边，直到门边顿个轮着说，常着生着人不去，马街不能解决，叫我娘吧没吧，国内工作别我说，东年到我人不去，马街不能解决。叫我娘吧，国内工作别我说，啥些别些就是没到找，人家临时人的肩膀的，上街行动没得为我也，如果能到行了，这我说，刚才认为国外新工作平常的我马路中为。现在是我认真要作业，下月4点8多点就去。Oh, I remember something. Can I get chabe de sedu kalor wa ge? Di kadu la shense the ma songwa. Shense. Tagu the ma songwa ge. Ah no. Okay. So then that's not it. I thought there's another term. I thought this should be. 叫我滚到杨大拉满当，人民确见白了龙主节，萨达南节云天入座，多节强烈过把牛都说。